Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. Released September of 2024. Available on Steam, Xbox, and PlayStation. Retailing for $59.99 on Steam and $69.99 on both PlayStation and Xbox. Space Marine 2 is a third-person shooter, and as the title would suggest, you play as a Space Marine, which is a super soldier working for the Imperium. In particular, you're playing as an Ultramarine. Specifically, the same one you played in the first Space Marine game, if you're familiar. And the game actually starts with you still dealing with the fallout from the first game. Because after you saved an entire planet, rather than get rewarded, our hero had to perform penance by being in the Death Watch. This Death Watch section is mostly just meant to serve as a tutorial, and introduces us to the game's primary antagonist, the Tyranids. And for those unfamiliar, Tyranids are essentially off-brand xenomorphs. They are a massive group of hive-minded, spacefaring bugs that want to eat everything in their path. As a result of dealing with them as part of the Death Watch, our hero gets to go back to being an Ultramarine, where he gets upgraded to being a Primaris Marine, which means he's a bigger, tougher Space Marine than before, and despite the fact he was a captain before the events of the first game, he's only going to be a lieutenant now. So even having successfully served his penance, he still gets a demotion. But at least he's back with the Ultramarines, and he will have a small squad with him on every mission. Which means that whatever you're doing, you'll have two NPC Space Marines with you, who surprisingly are actually somewhat effective. In cutscenes, they each have their own personality. One of them seems to be on board with you, the other one seems to constantly want to undermine you. And for the most part, you will just be fighting more Tyranids. And you will find out they come in different shapes and sizes, but they also all feel really similar to one another. But at a certain point in the game, it will be revealed that it's not just Tyranids. There will, of course, be Chaos Forces. Because you couldn't possibly do a Warhammer 40k game without getting Chaos involved. The Chaos Forces in question are the Thousand Suns, a Chaos Space Marine chapter, that are actually just empty suits of power armor. When you defeat them, there is no blood. Their armor literally just blows apart and falls into a little pile. I am legitimately unclear if that actually means that they're gone, or they're just gonna get a new suit of armor. So for the first part of the game, you'll be fighting Tyranids, then you get to fight some Chaos. And interestingly, you do occasionally see the Chaos fighting the Tyranids, showing that the Tyranids are a problem for everyone. When playing the single-player portion of this game, one problem I have with it is that a lot of the weapons feel very, very similar to one another, as most of them are variation on bolters in some way. You have the bolt rifle, the automatic bolt rifle, and then the heavy bolt rifle. And the game will tell you the heavy bolt rifle does more damage, but practically when you're playing, it's hard to tell much of a difference. There's also several different weapons that are meant to be for sniping. But there again, the actual practical difference between using any of them is pretty marginal at best. And then occasionally you get weapons that are just incredibly situational. Like there's one part of the game where you absolutely have to use a flamer, as you're going through rooms with little rodent-sized Tyranids completely covering the floor. And it will take care of those. But if you try to use it on any of the bigger Tyranids, the flamer seems wildly ineffective. You also occasionally find heavier weapons that have a limited amount of ammo that cannot be replenished. These are things like the two Melta weapons, which are fun to use, but just don't last all that long. One thing that was nice to see return from the first game, you do occasionally get to use the jump pack. Jumping up and then slamming onto groups of enemies is still just as fun this time around. But single player is only a part of this game. There's also a rather extensive multiplayer portion of this game, which consists of both PvP and PvE content. At several points during the single-player campaign, you're told there is a second squad of Space Marines, and they are doing some kind of mission that will affect your mission. And you can actually play this other squad's missions in the multiplayer. And having this story element involved in the multiplayer is an excellent way to get players involved in multiplayer that might not be interested otherwise. In terms of non-story-based multiplayer action, you have a class-based shooter where you can play as various kinds of Marines, like Tech Marines or Assault Marines. etc. And of course, there's several different game modes to play. So if you ever really wanted to play Overwatch but with a Warhammer skin, here you go. Truth be told, I think this multiplayer mode is interesting and could easily be expanded into a full game all on its own. Something like the Vermintide games, but obviously themed in Warhammer 40k as opposed to regular Warhammer. Apparently, this aspect of the game is still receiving updates even a couple years on. So is Warhammer Space Marine 2 worth your time and money? Well, maybe, if the weapons differentiated themselves a little bit more, and if there were more jump pack sections, and if you had enemies that were a little more interesting than the Tyranids and, of course, Chaos, but weapons that feel far too similar, a severe limit of jump pack action, and fake xenomorphs coupled with possibly the visually least interesting chapter of Trader Space Marines, kinda make the $60 to $70 price tag of this game feel a little not worth it. But of course, you still have the multiplayer aspect. But there again, there are PvE and PvP multiplayer games like this that are available at cheaper prices than this. Many of them are free, at least to an extent. It all just leaves this package feeling rather underwhelming. And then there's little aspects of it that kind of bothered me. Like, they're supposed to be Primaris Marines. Alright. Primaris Marines are supposed to be considerably larger than the original kind. But when you see them standing next to regular humans, they seem to be scaled about the same as they were in the first game, and logically they should look significantly smaller. I also couldn't see the Marines walking without laughing. When they were running in combat situations, it looked fine. But when they were casually walking around, it looked like a little kid trying to act like a tough guy. It reminded me of how the Chicken Hawk would walk around in Foghorn Leghorn cartoons. And I can't help but think they could have found a way to make this look far less silly, because I can't imagine this was actually the intent. And really, once you notice that they walk around like that, it's almost impossible to take anything happening seriously. And then there's the fact that you fight the Thousand Suns, which, visually speaking, are quite boring, as they're just alternate Space Marines. Most Space Marine chapters suffer some kind of mutations from Chaos, but because they're just empty suits of armor, they don't have mutations. They just look like suits of power armor. And you see enough of that with your own squad already. So, it's pretty obvious at this point, I'm gonna tell you not to buy Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. This might be worthwhile at about $20, but at $60 to $70, absolutely not. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.